The person you love just had a private conversation about you. Here's what they said. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. If these words have appeared before you today, don't rush past them. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the loudest truths. Somewhere, while you've been wondering whether the person you love still thinks about you, an unexpected conversation has already taken place. It happened behind closed doors, away from social media, away from public attention, away from every place where appearances usually matter. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It simply happened because your name unexpectedly entered the conversation, and once it did, the person you love could no longer hide what had been living inside their heart. For weeks, perhaps even months, they had convinced themselves they were doing fine. They smiled when people asked how life was going. They kept themselves busy. They acted as though every chapter of the past had already been closed. But deep inside, your memory had never completely left them. They simply became very good at pretending it had. The conversation began in the most ordinary way. A trusted friend noticed something different about them. They seemed distracted. They laughed at the right moments but never with their whole heart. They often stared into space as though replaying memories no one else could see. Finally, someone asked a simple question that caught them completely off guard. Are you still thinking about that person? For several seconds they didn't answer. Not because they didn't know the truth, but because admitting it out loud would make everything real. Silence filled the room. Then they quietly lowered their eyes and whispered something they had been trying to deny for far too long. Yes, every single day. Those words surprised even them. The moment they spoke honestly, it felt as though a heavy weight quietly fell from their shoulders. They had spent so much energy convincing themselves they had moved on that they forgot how exhausting pretending could become. Their friend didn't interrupt. They simply listened. For the first time in a long while, your future soulmate, or the person your heart still deeply cares about, felt safe enough to tell the complete truth. If they could somehow send you a letter immediately after that conversation, perhaps it would begin like this. I wish you knew how often your name still crosses my mind. I wish you knew that moving forward and forgetting are not the same thing. People assumed I had forgotten because I stopped talking about you, but silence never meant you stopped mattering. Sometimes silence simply meant I didn't know how to explain emotions I barely understood myself. There were days I wanted to reach out. There were nights I almost sent a message. I opened our old conversations more times than I can count, then closed them again because I didn't know if hearing from me would bring peace or confusion into your life. As those imagined words settled into their heart, the conversation continued. Their friend gently asked another question. If you had one chance to tell them the truth without fear, what would you say? Again, there was silence. Not awkward silence. Honest silence. The kind that appears when someone is searching for words worthy of carrying the weight of their heart. Finally they answered. I would tell them I'm sorry for every moment my silence made them question their worth. I would tell them they deserved honesty long before now. I would tell them there wasn't a single day when I completely stopped caring. Those words were never spoken directly to you. Not yet. But they were spoken. And sometimes speaking the truth for the first time changes a person forever. The rest of that evening became a conversation unlike any they had experienced before. Instead of pretending everything was fine, they allowed themselves to revisit memories they had carefully locked away. They remembered the first conversations that made them smile without realizing it. They remembered little details most people would have forgotten. The way you encouraged them when they doubted themselves, the moments when simple laughter made difficult days easier, and the quiet comfort of feeling understood without needing endless explanations. As each memory returned, they realized something unexpected. Time had softened the pain. It had not erased the love. That realization frightened them because they had built so much of their recent life around believing they were finished with that chapter. Yet the more honestly they spoke, the more they understood they had never truly closed the door. They had only stopped looking at it. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe someone from your own past still crosses your mind during ordinary moments. Maybe a familiar song unexpectedly reminds you of conversations you thought you had forgotten. Maybe certain places still carry memories that quietly return without permission. If so, then you already understand what your future soulmate is experiencing. Some connections leave impressions deeper than time alone can erase. As the conversation continued, their friend asked one final question. "What are you afraid of?" This time the answer came immediately. "I'm afraid it's too late." Those 4 words echoed through the room. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were painfully honest. They feared too much time had passed. They feared too many misunderstandings had accumulated. They feared reaching out only to discover they had already become a stranger in your life. Yet another part of them quietly whispered something entirely different. What if it isn't too late? That single possibility refused to disappear. For the first time in months, hope quietly entered a room that had been occupied only by regret. Later that night, after returning home, they sat alone with those thoughts. The conversation replayed repeatedly inside their mind. Instead of feeling embarrassed for admitting the truth, they felt relieved. Honesty had not weakened them. It had set them free. They realized they could no longer keep living as though pretending was easier than healing. They understood that whether your paths eventually crossed again or not, becoming emotionally honest was a necessary part of their journey. That night they opened a notebook and began writing words they never expected anyone else to read. They wrote about missed opportunities. They wrote about conversations they wished had happened differently. They wrote about lessons learned through silence. Most importantly, they wrote about hope. Hope that genuine understanding was still possible. Hope that forgiveness remained stronger than pride. Hope that love built on honesty could survive even after seasons of uncertainty. Before closing the notebook, they wrote one final paragraph. If these words somehow find you before I ever find the courage to speak them myself, I hope you know something important. You were never as forgettable as I tried to convince myself. I carried pieces of our story quietly because I didn't know whether reopening the chapter would heal us or hurt us again. But tonight, for the first time, I admitted your name without pretending it meant nothing. That truth changed something inside me. I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know whether life will ever give us another conversation. But I know this. If another opportunity ever appears, I don't want fear speaking louder than my heart again. I want honesty to arrive before regret. I want gratitude to replace silence. I want the next words you hear from me, if life ever allows them, to come from the truest version of who I've become. Until that day, I'll keep becoming someone who values truth more than pride, because the memory of you reminded me that real feelings never disappear simply because we refuse to talk about them. Perhaps that is why this message has reached you today. Not because every story ends with reconciliation, and not because anyone can know exactly what another person is thinking, but because hidden conversations, whether with trusted friends or with ourselves, often become the beginning of profound personal change. The person you love has finally stopped running from their own heart. They have spoken words they kept buried for far too long, and in doing so they have begun discovering that honesty is not the end of hope. Sometimes it is the first step toward the future they were too afraid to imagine. The conversation should have ended that night, but it didn't. Long after the first honest words were spoken, the silence between your future soulmate and the trusted friend sitting across from them became even more meaningful than the conversation itself. Neither of them felt the need to rush. Sometimes the deepest truths arrive slowly, one memory at a time. The room remained quiet, interrupted only by the sound of a clock marking the passing minutes. It almost felt symbolic, as though time itself was reminding your future soulmate that every moment spent hiding their heart had slowly become another moment they could never get back. They stared down at their hands, took a long breath, and realized something that had frightened them for months. They had spent so much energy trying to convince everyone else that they had moved on that they had never allowed themselves the freedom to ask whether they truly wanted to. Their friend finally broke the silence with another gentle question. What is it about them that you still can't forget? This time there was no hesitation. It wasn't just who they were, they quietly replied. It was who I became whenever I was with them. Those words surprised even them. They had expected to talk about memories, moments, or conversations. Instead, they found themselves describing a feeling. They remembered how peaceful their heart had once felt. How easy it had been to laugh. How natural it had felt to dream about the future instead of constantly worrying about tomorrow. They realized that the person they loved had not only left memories behind. They had awakened parts of their heart that no one else had reached. If they could somehow send you another page from this invisible letter, perhaps it would begin this way. I've met many people since our paths changed, but none of them reminded me of the version of myself I became whenever you were part of my life. Around you, I didn't feel like I had to earn acceptance. I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to become someone different just to be appreciated. Somewhere along the way I forgot how rare that feeling truly was. Only after losing it did I understand its value. Those words remained unspoken. Yet simply admitting them aloud transformed something deep inside. The conversation slowly turned toward regret. Not regret rooted in self-pity. Regret rooted in understanding. Your future soulmate admitted there had been moments when pride became louder than honesty. Moments when fear disguised itself as patience. Moments when they convinced themselves there would always be another opportunity to explain how they truly felt. They now understood how dangerous that assumption had been. Life rarely announces when a conversation becomes the last one. It rarely warns us before ordinary days quietly become unforgettable memories. That realization settled heavily upon their heart. Their friend listened carefully before asking another question. If you could relive one moment, which one would you choose? Without thinking, your future soulmate smiled. Not because the memory was painless. Because it was beautiful. They remembered an ordinary conversation. Nothing dramatic happened. No grand declarations. No unforgettable event. Just two people sharing time without realizing how precious those simple moments would someday become. They remembered laughter that arrived effortlessly. Comfort that required no explanation. Silence that never felt uncomfortable. Looking back, they realized those ordinary moments had quietly become extraordinary because genuine connection rarely announces its importance while it is happening. Perhaps your own heart understands that feeling. Maybe there are conversations you once considered ordinary until time transformed them into treasured memories. Maybe there are people you wish you had appreciated more while they were still part of your everyday life. If so, your journey and your future soulmate's journey quietly reflect one another. Both of you are discovering that love often reveals its greatest value through hindsight. As the evening continued, something unexpected happened. Their friend gently challenged them. If your heart is finally being honest, then why are you still silent? The question lingered in the room. There was no easy answer. Finally, your future soulmate admitted the truth. I'm afraid they've already built a beautiful life without me. That fear had quietly shaped every decision they made. It kept them from reaching out. It convinced them that silence was more respectful than vulnerability. It whispered that protecting themselves from possible rejection was wiser than risking another conversation. Yet another part of them had begun questioning that fear. What if silence wasn't protecting anyone? What if it was only extending regret? Those thoughts followed them long after they left their friend's house. Driving home that evening, they turned off the radio. They wanted complete silence. Streetlights passed one after another while memories filled the empty space. They remembered promises. They remembered misunderstandings. They remembered moments they wished they had handled differently. But something else happened too. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by regret, they began recognizing how much they had grown. The person sitting behind that steering wheel was no longer ruled by pride. They were no longer trying to appear emotionally invincible. Pain had taught them humility. Distance had taught them gratitude. Silence had taught them the extraordinary value of honest words. By the time they reached home, another realization had quietly settled into their heart. Whether or not your paths ever crossed again, they never wanted fear to control their decisions another day. That night they opened their journal once more. This time the words came faster. I don't know whether life will ever allow us another conversation. But if it does, I refuse to waste it pretending I don't care. I've already experienced what silence creates. It creates questions that never receive answers. It creates stories built on assumptions instead of truth. If another opportunity ever comes, I want courage to arrive before hesitation. As they finished writing, they noticed tears resting quietly in their eyes. Not tears of hopelessness. Tears of release. Sometimes healing begins the moment someone finally stops arguing with their own heart. The following morning felt strangely different. Nothing around them had changed. The same responsibilities waited. The same routines continued. Yet internally, everything felt lighter. For the first time in months, they no longer felt trapped between what they truly felt and what they pretended to feel. Honesty had created peace. Not because every problem had disappeared. Because pretending finally had. Throughout the following week, they noticed small reminders of hope appearing in unexpected places. A familiar song unexpectedly played while they were shopping. A couple laughed together while sharing coffee at a nearby table. An elderly man gently held his wife's hand while crossing the street. None of these moments directly involved your story. Yet each one quietly reminded your future soulmate that genuine love still existed. That realization encouraged them more than they expected. They stopped asking whether love was possible. Instead, they began asking whether they were becoming emotionally ready for it. That question changed everything. Rather than focusing only on what they wished had happened differently, they focused on becoming someone capable of protecting love if life ever placed it in their hands again. They became more patient, more compassionate, more willing to communicate instead of assuming, more determined to listen before reacting. Every lesson learned through regret slowly transformed into wisdom. Perhaps your own heart is experiencing something similar. Perhaps life has been teaching you lessons that once felt unfair but now feel meaningful. Perhaps disappointments have quietly prepared you to appreciate healthy relationships in ways you never could before. If so, then this season is not meaningless. Neither is theirs. Both journeys are quietly creating two people capable of recognizing peace instead of chasing confusion. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another message resting gently inside your heart. If these words somehow find you before I ever find the courage to speak them myself, I hope you know that the conversation I had wasn't really about the past. It was about the future. It was about deciding that I no longer want fear writing the next chapter of my life. I don't know where your journey has taken you, and I don't know whether you've already found every answer your heart has been searching for. But I do know this. Meeting you changed something inside me that time never completely erased. You taught me that peace is possible. You taught me that genuine connection cannot be measured by how loudly people express it but by how deeply it transforms them. If life ever gives us another opportunity, I want to arrive as someone who has learned from every mistake instead of repeating it. Until then, I'll continue becoming someone who values honesty above pride, kindness above ego, and courage above fear. Because whether our stories meet again or continue separately, I never want another important conversation to remain hidden inside my heart. Perhaps that is the deeper meaning behind the private conversation that recently took place. It was never simply about remembering your name. It was about awakening a heart that had spent far too long hiding from its own truth. Every honest word spoken that evening quietly removed another layer of fear. Every memory revisited became another lesson in gratitude. Every moment of vulnerability became another step toward emotional freedom. And although neither of you can yet see the full picture, the conversation they had behind closed doors has already begun changing the person they are becoming, one truthful decision at a time. When the conversation finally ended and the room became quiet once again, your future soulmate walked outside into the cool evening air, believing they would immediately feel relieved after speaking the truth. Instead, something entirely unexpected happened. The honesty they had finally released did not disappear into the night. It followed them home. Every word they had spoken echoed gently in their mind. Every memory they had shared returned with greater clarity. For the first time in a very long while, they were no longer running from their emotions. They were walking beside them, allowing every feeling they had buried for so long to finally breathe. It was uncomfortable, yet strangely peaceful, because pretending had become far more exhausting than honesty ever could. As they slowly drove home beneath quiet streetlights, they found themselves replaying the entire conversation from beginning to end. They remembered the exact moment your name was mentioned. They remembered the hesitation before answering the first question. Most of all, they remembered the relief that arrived the instant they admitted, "Yes, I still think about them." Those simple words had carried months of hidden emotion. They realized that the hardest part had never been speaking the truth. The hardest part had been admitting the truth to themselves before anyone else could hear it. When they arrived home, they didn't turn on the television or scroll endlessly through their phone as they usually did after difficult days. Instead, they sat quietly beside the window and watched the lights of the city flicker in the distance. Hundreds of people were living their own stories at that very moment. Some were celebrating. Some were grieving. Some were falling in love. Others were saying goodbye. Looking at those distant lights, your future soulmate suddenly understood something beautiful. Every heart carries invisible chapters. No one walking down the street could see the conversation they had just experienced. Yet that private conversation had quietly become one of the most important moments of their life. If they could somehow write another page in this invisible letter to you, perhaps it would begin this way. Tonight I finally admitted something I've spent too long hiding. It wasn't easy. I wanted to convince myself I had forgotten you because forgetting seemed simpler than facing everything I still felt. But honesty has a strange way of setting a heart free. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight I stopped pretending. And somehow, even though nothing around me has changed, everything inside me feels different. Those words remained safely inside the pages of their journal. But the decision behind them continued shaping every thought that followed. The next morning, something unusual happened. They woke earlier than normal. Not because they couldn't sleep. Because their heart felt lighter. The burden of hiding had quietly begun disappearing. For months they had carried invisible questions. Should I have spoken sooner? Did they ever truly know how much they meant to me? Was silence protecting us, or only protecting my fear? Now those questions no longer felt impossible to face. They did not yet have every answer. But they had finally become brave enough to ask. Throughout the day they noticed themselves smiling at unexpected moments. A coworker shared a joke. A stranger held a door open. Someone complimented them without expecting anything in return. These ordinary moments suddenly felt more meaningful because honesty had changed the way they experienced the world. They were no longer surviving each day. They were beginning to live it again. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Perhaps there was a season when carrying hidden emotions made everything else feel heavier. Then one honest conversation changed more than you expected. Not because it solved every problem, but because it ended the exhausting battle between your heart and your silence. If so, your future soulmate understands exactly how that feels. As evening returned, they received another message from the friend who had listened so patiently the night before. The message was simple. "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words touched them more deeply than they expected. Not because they needed approval, but because someone had recognized the courage required to tell the truth. It reminded them that vulnerability is rarely weakness. Sometimes vulnerability becomes the doorway through which healing quietly enters. That evening they began thinking differently about love. They realized genuine love is not measured only by grand romantic moments. It is measured by emotional honesty. By choosing difficult conversations instead of comfortable silence. By admitting mistakes instead of protecting pride. By remaining willing to understand instead of rushing to defend yourself. Those realizations slowly reshaped every dream they carried about the future. They no longer imagined perfect relationships. They imagined truthful ones. They imagined 2 people who could admit when they were afraid. Who apologized sincerely. Who celebrated each other's victories without jealousy. Who created peace rather than constant emotional uncertainty. Those dreams suddenly mattered more than anything else. One rainy afternoon later that week, they stopped at a quiet cafe before heading home. Sitting near the window, they noticed 2 elderly people sharing coffee together. Neither of them spoke very much. Occasionally one would smile. Occasionally the other would gently reach across the table. There was no dramatic romance. No impressive display. Only calm. Watching them, your future soulmate quietly whispered to themselves. That's what I hope love eventually becomes. Not excitement built upon uncertainty. Not endless guessing games. Simply peace. That image remained with them long after they left. They realized that everything life had been teaching them through disappointment had prepared them to appreciate something many people overlook. Consistency. Kindness. Emotional safety. Trust. These qualities had become more attractive than excitement because they understood excitement fades if trust is missing. But trust allows love to grow stronger every year. Your future soulmate has also begun noticing something remarkable. Ever since that private conversation, they no longer feel ashamed of caring. Previously they believed loving deeply made them vulnerable. Now they understand loving honestly makes them courageous. That change has quietly transformed every area of their life. They communicate more openly. They listen more carefully. They judge less quickly. They appreciate small moments more deeply. Without realizing it, they are becoming the partner they once hoped someone else would become for them. Perhaps that is happening within your own heart as well. Maybe your difficult seasons have been quietly teaching patience. Maybe disappointment has taught discernment. Maybe loneliness has taught gratitude for genuine companionship. If so, Both of your journeys are preparing something extraordinary. Not perfection. Readiness. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another message resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you before our paths cross again, I hope you know that the conversation I had changed more than one evening. It changed me. It reminded me that hiding feelings never protects them. It only delays healing. I don't know what your life looks like today, and I don't know whether you've thought about me recently or not. But I do know that speaking honestly allowed me to become someone I had almost forgotten existed. Someone hopeful. Someone willing to believe that kindness still matters. Someone who refuses to let fear become louder than love. If life gives us another opportunity to speak someday, I don't want to arrive carrying walls built from old misunderstandings. I want to arrive with humility, gratitude, and the courage to say everything my heart should have said long ago. And if our stories are meant to continue separately, then I will still remain grateful because loving you taught me lessons that transformed my life forever. You reminded me that genuine connection is never measured by how long two people spend together. It is measured by how deeply they inspire one another to become better human beings. Until whatever tomorrow brings, I'll continue choosing honesty over silence, compassion over pride, and hope over regret. Perhaps that is why this message has reached you today. The private conversation was never simply about your name. It became the beginning of a quiet transformation that no one else could see. Every truthful word spoken behind those closed doors removed another layer of fear. Every memory shared replaced another piece of regret with understanding. Every tear they quietly wiped away became another reminder that hearts heal not by denying what they feel, but by finally giving those feelings a voice. Though neither of you can yet see how every chapter will unfold, one thing has already changed forever. The person you love is no longer hiding from the truth. They are becoming someone brave enough to let honesty shape the future instead of allowing silence to keep rewriting the past. In the days that followed that private conversation, your future soulmate noticed something remarkable happening inside them. The world around them had not suddenly changed. Their daily routine remained the same. The responsibilities waiting for them each morning were still there. The people they interacted with every day had no idea that anything significant had happened. Yet beneath the surface, everything felt different. It was as if a door they had kept locked for months had finally been opened, allowing fresh air to enter a room that had been closed for far too long. They no longer carried the exhausting responsibility of pretending they felt nothing. The truth had been spoken, and once a heart experiences that kind of honesty, it rarely wants to return to silence. They began paying closer attention to their own thoughts. They noticed that whenever your memory appeared, it no longer arrived with the same crushing regret. Instead, it brought gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the moments shared, and for the realization that genuine connections leave permanent fingerprints on the heart. They finally understood that trying to erase meaningful memories had never been the answer. Those memories were not enemies. They were reminders of what authentic love had taught them about kindness, patience, trust, and vulnerability. One evening they found themselves walking through a familiar neighborhood just before sunset. Families were returning home after work. Children laughed as they chased one another through a nearby park. A couple stood outside their front porch talking quietly while holding cups of coffee. None of these ordinary moments seemed extraordinary to anyone else. Yet to your future soulmate, they became powerful reminders of the kind of future they truly wanted. They realized they no longer dreamed about excitement alone. They dreamed about consistency. They dreamed about coming home to someone who felt like peace instead of uncertainty. They dreamed about conversations that ended with understanding instead of misunderstanding. Most of all, they dreamed about building a relationship where neither person had to wonder whether they were loved, because love would be demonstrated every single day through small, faithful actions. If they could write another page in the invisible letter they have been carrying inside their heart, perhaps it would begin like this. I've spent so much time thinking about what I should have said that I almost forgot to become the kind of person who knows how to say it. Loving someone isn't only about holding on to memories. It's about allowing those memories to shape you into someone wiser. You changed me in ways I didn't recognize until much later. You taught me that honesty is worth the risk, that silence often protects fear more than it protects people, and that the strongest hearts are not those that never break but those that remain gentle after they do. Wherever you are today, I hope life has been kind to you. I hope you've continued believing that genuine love still exists, because despite everything that happened, I still do. Those words remained unwritten anywhere except within their heart. But every decision they made afterward reflected them. Your future soulmate slowly began letting go of habits that no longer reflected the person they wanted to become. They stopped replaying old arguments in their mind. They stopped imagining conversations that would never happen exactly the way they pictured them. They stopped allowing regret to steal today's peace. Instead, they began investing their energy into becoming emotionally healthier. They read books that challenged their thinking. They spent more time in quiet reflection. They reached out to trusted friends instead of carrying every burden alone. Every small decision became another step away from fear and another step toward emotional freedom. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Perhaps there was a season when your greatest breakthrough wasn't receiving the answer you hoped for but becoming a healthier version of yourself while waiting. Maybe you've discovered that healing often begins long before circumstances improve. Maybe you've realized that peace is something cultivated within the heart before it appears in everyday life. If that feels familiar, then your journey and your future soulmate's journey are quietly mirroring one another. Both of you are learning that lasting love is built by two people who first learn how to live honestly with themselves. As the weeks continued, another unexpected conversation took place. This time it wasn't with a friend. It was with themselves. Standing in front of the mirror one morning, preparing for another ordinary day, they quietly asked, if life gave me another opportunity, would I choose differently? The answer came without hesitation. Yes. Not because they wanted to rewrite the past, but because they had become someone different. The fear that once controlled them had lost much of its power. The pride that once kept them silent had softened into humility. The uncertainty that once convinced them to wait had been replaced by quiet courage. They smiled gently at their own reflection, realizing that growth often happens so gradually we don't notice it until one ordinary morning reveals how different we have become. Throughout the following days they found themselves appreciating small acts of kindness more deeply than ever before. A coworker checking in after a stressful meeting. A stranger smiling as they passed by. Someone remembering a detail they had shared weeks earlier. These simple gestures reminded them that love is rarely built through dramatic moments alone. More often, it grows through consistent care shown in everyday life. That realization changed the way they imagined the future. They no longer longed for a perfect romance. They longed for a peaceful partnership where both people continually chose one another through ordinary acts of compassion. Sometimes they still wondered whether you had ever thought about them after your paths separated. They never assumed the answer. Instead, they quietly hoped that wherever life had taken you, you had found reasons to smile again. They hoped your difficult seasons had also produced wisdom instead of bitterness. They hoped you had learned that your worth was never determined by misunderstanding or distance. Most of all, they hoped you had not stopped believing in the possibility of a healthy, honest, lasting love. Late one night they opened their journal once again. This time there were no tears. No overwhelming regret. Only gratitude. They wrote page after page describing the person they hoped to become. Someone who listens carefully before speaking. Someone who apologizes quickly when wrong. Someone who protects trust as though it were the most valuable gift two people could share. As they finished writing, they realized something beautiful. They were no longer writing only about you. They were writing about the future version of themselves. That realization filled their heart with peace. Before this chapter closes, your future soulmate wants to leave one final message resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you before life ever gives us another chance to speak, I want you to know something I finally understand. The private conversation I had about you wasn't really about the past. It became the beginning of my future. Speaking honestly reminded me that hiding emotions never protects them, it only delays the healing they desperately need. I don't know where your journey has taken you, and I don't know whether we'll ever share another conversation. But I know this with certainty. Loving you changed the standard by which I now measure every relationship. It taught me to value peace over pride, communication over assumptions, and honesty over comfort. If destiny ever allows our paths to cross again, I won't waste the opportunity pretending my heart feels less than it does. And if life leads us along different roads, I'll still remain grateful because knowing you made me a kinder, wiser, and more compassionate person. Wherever you are today, I hope you're becoming the person your own future deserves. I hope you're protecting your peace, honoring your heart, and refusing to settle for anything less than the kind of love that feels safe, truthful, and steady. Until tomorrow reveals whatever it has prepared, I'll keep choosing courage instead of silence because I finally understand that the greatest conversations are not the ones we rehearse perfectly. They are the ones spoken honestly from a healed heart. Perhaps that is the hidden meaning behind everything that has unfolded. The private conversation was never simply about remembering your name or confessing old emotions. It became the moment your future soulmate stopped allowing fear to guide their decisions. Every honest word spoken behind those closed doors quietly transformed them into someone more emotionally available, more compassionate, and more prepared for the future than ever before. While neither of you can know exactly what tomorrow will bring, one truth remains. Hearts that choose honesty over pride are never unchanged. They grow. They heal. They become capable of creating the kind of lasting love that is built not on perfect circumstances, but on unwavering trust, gentle understanding, and the courage to finally say what matters before another precious moment slips away.